Thanks for stopping by the channel today. My name's Jason. I'm KC5HWB. This is the extra class. This is the final class in the 3 classes of amateur radio licensing that exist in the United States today. Some of my most popular videos on this channel have been the technician class and the general class, which is class 1 and class 2, or level 1 and level 2, if you will. This is level 3. This is the final level. This is the top license you can get. And I want to thank the North Richland Hills Amateur Radio Club for allowing me to record this Zoom class they did at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. It was about 8 6 to 7 hour sessions, so you're in for a wild ride today. Go through them as many times as you want to. Fast forward, stop, pause, rewind, whatever you want to do. Play them over and over again. This is good information for those of you who are currently a general and wanting to upgrade to amateur extra. Thank you to the North Richland Hills Amateur Radio Club. Their website will be linked in the description of the video below. And I hope you enjoy the video series.
Yeah, this is the longest section we have today, so we'll try not to interrupt it with questions. My later thing is maybe a third to a half the length of this. So I guess what I'm saying, Wayne, is take the time you need to do this, and I'll squeeze mine in when we get there.
All right. Well, this one isn't just real long. It has sections that flow together, and we go through different modes and different parts of digital communication, and we'll just get going and see where we end up. Set to go. My name is John Dawsey, K5GD. Some people call me John Wayne. I guess my mother was a favorite fan way back in the day. We're going to talk about digital excitement with your computers and radios from Gordon West's book, the 2020 to 2024 Extra Class License Manual. So let's get right into it. We need to spend a little bit of time talking about digital communications, digital modulation, and speaking of the list of links for figures that I'm using, I'll add these two to it also. This is out of tutorialspoint.com, and there's a lot of other stuff there that explains other modulation types besides frequency shift keying and phase shift keying. But let's talk about these for a minute. They're in the top third of the picture, I guess top half of the picture. Frequency shift keying, when the digital signal goes from 0 to a 1, a logic low to high or high to low, depending on the sense of your logic, whichever it is, it changes the carrier frequency, or it changes the frequency of a modulating signal. Direct frequency shift keying applies the data straight to the transmitter VFO, so that you are just directly changing the VFO frequency with the digital data. And you can see here on a very expanded scale, when the digital signal is high, you've got a high frequency. When the digital signal is low at 0 volts, you've got a low frequency as the sine waves are spaced out more. That's direct FSK, frequency shift keying. And all this is useful for data emissions below 30 megahertz. That's also a test question. Audio frequency shift keying is a bit different. This is where you apply the data to an audio tone and then transmit that audio tone through a phone mode. So audio FSK or AFSK is using audio tone to change the audio tone instead of the RF carrier. Now, an AFSK signal can overmodulate the transmitter due to excessive audio level. So that's where my sound card interface between the radio and my computer has like a volume control. It has a level control of the audio coming out of my computer sound card going into the radio, and I have to be careful of that audio level that goes to the radio, or I can overmodulate the transmitter. Now, intermod distortion, IMD, evaluates the distortion in the AFSK signal, because if the AFSK gets distorted, the receiver can't copy it. The sound card at the receive end and the sound card in the computer, or interface to the computer, either one, can't handle distorted signals. So it has to be a good, clean audio signal if you're using AFSK. And that distortion is evaluated by intermodulation measure. Now, PSK is a bit different. That's phase shift keying. And again, we've got the same digital waveform that we're trying to transmit. In a PSK that's applied to the RF carrier in phase shift keying modulation, the phase of the carrier is inverted every time the bit stream changes from a 0 to a 1 or a 1 to a 0. And that change is always taken at the 0 crossing of the RF waveform. Now, that's done, you shift the phase of the RF carrier at the 0 crossing because it minimizes the bandwidth. Because if you shift the phase anywhere else, it's going to widen the bandwidth out, and you're going to increase the bandwidth that you're using. Now, phase shift keying can also have modulation, intermodulation distortion that evaluates the distortion in the signal, and the idling PSK signal needs less than -30 intermod distortion measurement. IMD is intermodulation distortion. Next slide. Let's talk about data rates. And yes, I'll put a link to this chart, although I have taken out some of the modulations that they had in the chart, but these are on the chart. So data rates, HF packet operation usually uses 300 baud. Now baud is another name for symbol rate. So you can say symbol rate, or you can say baud, but don't say baud rate, because that's not saying miles per hour. That's just not right. Baud means symbol rate. So HF packet operation usually uses 300 baud, or you can say 300 symbols per second. PACTOR transfers binary files at HF at 300 baud. That's the code name that's used for binary files at HF, and it's PACTOR at 300 baud. But PACTOR is not for keyboard communications, like typing keyboard to keyboard, character by character. It's only for binary files. Symbol rate is the rate at which the waveform changes. You remember back on FSK and PSK, how fast the digital data comes is the symbol rate. If you have trouble initiating a contact with the digital station over a clear frequency, it can be caused by many reasons. All the choices are correct. In clear conditions, 300 baud packet is the fastest mode. And for radio teletype, baudot digital code uses 5 data bits per character. So that will set the baud rate. See, I said it, I got that wrong. It sets the baud. So what data rate do we have? I use data rate, symbol rate, baud are all the same in this discussion. For PAC-TOR, we said it's 300 baud. So that's our scale down here at the bottom, raw data rate, bits per second. Bits per second, symbol rate, baud, all the same thing in this discussion. PAC-TOR, we have about 300. Well, we have at 300. It's not about, it is 300 baud. AMTOR, which is a lot older code, digital code, operates at 74 baud. Radio teletype using the baudot digital code with 5 data bits per character can run 45. That's the standard rate, is 45 baud for radio teletype. And PSK31 is 31 baud. That's the way that digital code is set up. Let's talk about data codes and error correction. Now, to get into the details of all these codes is complete college courses in data communications, and I've had those, and I'd rather much be doing something else. Reading the FCC Part 97 is at times a lot more exciting than sitting in a data communication class. Although it sounded really interesting when I started, it's a whole lot of mathematics, and it gets pretty dry pretty quick.
Yeah, for most of us, it's the software is going to do the work and the thinking.
Oh yeah, computers and software does all the work now. You don't have to tune stuff. You don't have to worry about all the details. Just know that these principles exist, and this is the information that will be on the test. So forward error correction, FEC, works by transmitting extra data in the data stream, which is used to detect and correct data errors. Just like its name says, it's forward error correction, and the error correction occurs at the receiver. So it's working in a forward direction, and it's transmitting extra data, which detects and corrects errors. Now in packet radio, usually uses a technique called automatic request, ARQ. Automatic request works by requesting a retransmission if the receiver detects an error. A gray code is a type of code that changes only 1 bit between sequential code values. So if you consider like the baudot code, which is 5 bits to represent 1 character, you can go from transmitting the letters AFSK. The codes for AFS and K can all be different by 2 or 3 bits or 4 bits at a time. But a gray code changes only 1 bit between sequential code values. High-speed digital modes use orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, which is subcarriers at frequencies that avoid intersymbol interference. Now that type of modulation can be used and is used over the radio, typically at higher frequencies, because we had FSK below HF on 30 megahertz. Now, I might have got that wrong. HF packet uses 300 baud, and that's FSK. Okay. So the high-speed digital modes, which is, let's see, where's that question? There's another question somewhere that defines where we can use high-speed digital modes, but they use modulation techniques like are used in the transmission of digital data down your cable TV line, because TV is now all digital, and your internet connection through your cable TV and DSL service over twisted pair lines all used orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. It's subcarriers at frequencies that avoid intersymbol interference. In all the cable transmission and cable modulation, techniques, intersymbol interference is a killer. That really drastically limits the data rate you can put down those lines. So that's a special type of data code and modulation, is orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. It's what's used for high-speed data modes. Selective fading will cause an FSK crossed ellipse display to collapse one ellipse. So FSK can be seen on a scope by using crossed ellipses. And if selective fading is happening, such as you're bouncing your HF digital signal through the ionosphere, and you get those pieces of your RF signal separating and getting twisted, it's going to cause selective fading, and one side of your ellipse is going to collapse. One side of your crossed ellipse display will collapse. That's selective fading. ASCII code can transmit both uppercase and lowercase text. Usually, and I mean, when I first started copying CW, I just wrote down all uppercase letters. I mean, it was faster. I could write those faster than I can. Lowercase, I don't use lowercase. If I do that, I get to where I can't read the characters, and that wasn't good for the FCC examiner. He always had to have uppercase letters, is what he stressed. But ASCII code as a digital code can transmit both uppercase and lowercase text. ASCII characters, the ASCII code has a parity bit in the characters, means that some types of errors can be detected. So the data transmission doesn't have to have a fancy forward error correction. You can use that also in types of coding and modulation, but the parity bits in ASCII characters themselves can help correct some types of errors. Let's talk about the bandwidth that each of these codes use. We're not going to talk about all of them, just the ones that pertain to the extra class test. PSK31 uses variable length coding and sinusoidal data pulses for bandwidth efficiency, which has the narrowest bandwidth. Now, the sinusoidal data pulse and the variable length coding is what really keeps the bandwidth down, and it compresses the bandwidth to move the 31 bits per second. 300 baud ASCII using 170 hertz shift will use 500 hertz of bandwidth, and that's equal to half a kilohertz if you remember how to do the scientific notation. If you don't remember that, there's look up scientific notation, and it's all by factors of 10. A kilohertz is 1,000, so you can shift the decimal point 3 places, get from 500 hertz to half a kilohertz. 9600 baud ASCII with 4800 hertz shift really increases the bandwidth. It's 15.365 kilohertz. That'll have to be used on higher frequency, higher frequency amateur bands, not HF, because at HF, all these digital modulation techniques have to fit within that 3 kilohertz audio bandwidth. That's an FCC rule. Using a more efficient digital code can increase the data rate without increasing bandwidth. See, that's why all the study of digital codes and digital modulation is to get as much data through as you can so you can increase the data rate without increasing bandwidth, and you use an efficient digital code to do that. Now, one of the applications for digital transmission is APRS, Automatic Position Reporting System. If you add a GPS, everybody knows that's global positioning system, to automatically transmit location using the latitude and longitude of that station, you can help support a public service communication activity. That's some of the fun of getting out, working with public service groups in Fort Worth. If you look up Google on Fort Worth RACES, RACES, you can see all the public service activities that we used to do before the coronavirus mess a year ago in 1st of 2019. So during 2019, there were not a lot of public service communication activities. Well, no, I got that wrong, 2020. I don't know, I've lost a year, I'm sorry. During 20,
as have we all.
It's been a long year, that's all I can say. But the Fort Worth RACES group would support lots of public service communication activities with automatically transmitting the location of the roving ham radio stations by transmitting latitude and longitude from a GPS.
The way that helps public service is that the net control can see where you are without your taking airtime to tell him.
Right, such as the different functions of that public service activity. Hams support the functions in operation of those activities, like bicycle runs, marathons. I did one time that was the Cowtown Marathon. That was pretty fun. Okay, APRS beacon data is transmitted using the AX.25 digital protocol with unnumbered information frames. So let me say it again. Unnumbered information frames transmit APRS beacon data using the AX.25 digital protocol. There I go, trying to speak Texan again. Sorry, that's the language I know. That's what I grew up with.
I can understand you.
Okay, good. I can understand you too. Thanks. Now let's talk about spread spectrum communication. Spread spectrum transmissions on ham bands are permitted only above 222 megahertz. That's because spread spectrum is a wide bandwidth transmission technique. Spread spectrum uses frequency hopping, which is changing the transmitter frequency very rapidly. And the way it does that, it's called direct sequence spread spectrum, uses a high-speed bit stream to run the PSK. That's the direct sequence spread spectrum. Now,
Yeah, there are two methods of generating spread spectrum, and the idea is that you spread out the power from the transmitter across a larger band so that the amount of energy that is being put on any frequency is the average power is way down, which means that you could operate a spread spectrum in the 70-meter repeater band and never be detected except by other spread spectrum systems. One is frequency hopping and the other is the direct sequence using the PSK. Sorry, Wayne.
Right, yeah, that's fine. That's good information. Thanks, John. Spread spectrum signals are resistant to interference. This is another reason why you use spread spectrum, is because you spread out your RF power over a big wide range, so little interference, little narrowband interference doesn't bother it.
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
How many people here, and you can go down to the reactions and click a raised hand or click one of the reactions so that we can see it on the screen. How many people here have ever used spread spectrum? Okay, let me ask, I see Glenn with his hand up, and I see Greg, KN6ITL. And I'm assuming that's ham radio use of spread spectrum, right?
Oh, I thought you were asking about all uses of spread spectrum.
Well, I was.
Oh, okay.
But Greg and Glenn both indicated they had used it. Was that ham radio for you?
No, for me, it was when I was with Motorola and we were developing a new product.
Okay, I want to let you know that almost everybody here has used spread spectrum.
Yes.
I think everybody does. Should
Yep,
be
got
everybody.
it in your pocket.
Well,
Right. It's in your pocket.
the cell phone and the wireless cell phones or wireless home phones, 900 megahertz and above, use spread spectrum in their technology.
Right.
And it did two things. It eliminated some of the eavesdropping, and the other thing is that it reduced the interference from nearby cell phones.
Right.
But, you know, so this is a coming technology, and I don't know how to rate what the possibilities are with hams using it. Naturally, if you use a 900 megahertz cell phone and convert it to, or a wireless cordless phone and convert it to ham communications, you will be using spread spectrum.
Yes, you can do that.
Anyway,
You know,
I'll shut up again.
okay. If you want to look into it more and learn about it, the first name you'll come across is Qualcomm. And I'll put this in the list of references, QUALCOMM, or Google spread spectrum, and you'll find the name Qualcomm. They're the company that invented it a long time ago. And yes, it does spread out the RF energy over a wide range. I forget what question we were on. This one, I think. It's spread spectrum signals are resistant to interference since signals that are not using the spread spectrum algorithm are suppressed in the receiver. That's the answer to the question, but the real reason is they're not listening to the same code, to the same, well, wait a minute before I say anything else. Maybe I better quit talking. But that's the answer to the question. They're not using the same spectrum algorithm as other spread spectrum signals so that they don't interfere with each other. In fact, you can have several spread spectrum signals on the same frequency, and as long as the receivers and transmitters aren't too close to each other, they don't even know the others exist. They're listening to different codes that the frequency hopping, which changes the transmitter frequency very rapidly, and the high-speed bit stream for direct sequence spread spectrum are all unique codes that the transmitter and receiver have. And when they get matched up, that's too much communication theory information, but when they get matched up, that's when they can communicate. And so other signals around them don't bother the spread spectrum communications because they're suppressed in the receiver. When transmitting spread spectrum, all the choices are correct. We'll go over those when we get to here's the choices down here. Just like any other amateur radio, now we're talking about amateur radio application with spread spectrum. Just like every other transmission, must not cause harmful interference, must be in an area that permits spread spectrum geographically and in frequency, must not be used to obscure the meaning of the message. And that's pretty much FCC rules for any amateur radio transmission. But all the choices are correct when you transmit spread spectrum on that question. Let's talk about mesh networks. Gordon never says what a mesh network is. A mesh network is like your Wi-Fi network in your house. Amateurs can use frequencies shared with various unlicensed wireless devices, parentheses Wi-Fi, but that's not on the test, are used for amateur radio mesh networks. The test questions never mention Wi-Fi, but that's what it's talking about. So frequencies shared with other unlicensed wireless data services are used for amateur radio mesh networks. The equipment used is a wireless router running custom firmware, because as a radio amateur, you can't transmit outside the ham bands. So you have to have firmware that sets the channels that these routers, the wireless routers, Wi-Fi access points, which is a wireless router, runs on the hardware that you're running. Individual nodes use discovery and link establishment protocols. When you link up your laptop computer to your home Wi-Fi network, that's what it's using, discovery and link establishment protocols. That's how mesh networks set up their individual nodes. And you have to remember that PACTOR does not support keyboard-to-keyboard operation. It's only for files, and that's 300 baud on HF. PACTOR does not support keyboard-to-keyboard operation. We'll see the question in every other mode of transmission that does, but PACTOR is the one that doesn't support that. PACTOR only does files. Let's talk about CW, is the International Morse Code. It was the original digital transmission mode for wireless communications. It's a digital code. It runs, if you run at 13 words a minute, it'll use 52 hertz of bandwidth, pretty narrow. So that's why you can hear several stations, even if your receiver bandwidth is set down to 400 or 500 hertz. You can still have several CW stations in there at once, and you can copy them all if you can keep track of more than one conversation at a time. I've had trouble with that.
As have we all.
Right. CW bandwidth can really expand if your keying speed and shape factor changes. Rise and fall time defines the shape factor. Rise and fall time is your keying wave shape in your transmitter. So keying speed and shape factor affect the CW bandwidth. Extremely short rise and fall times cause a generation of key clicks. For all the code practice I've been trying to do, have done, and now I'm trying to get my code speed back up above 20, which is really tough. I listen to lots of CW, and some of them still have, even in 2020 and 2021, still have key clicks. I mean, key clicks were bad back when you directly switched the bias voltage on a transmitter tube, on the oscillator transmitter that was going straight to the power amplifier. Most of the radios now use a lot of circuit that smooths out the switch waveform that goes to the VFO, turning the power on and off that goes out the power amplifier of the transmitter. So it slows down those rise and fall times so there's not key clicks. Every once in a while, you still hear somebody. It's got to be an older transmitter that has key clicks. It clicks on the radio. You hear it every time the tone in the CW starts and stops. But that's caused by extremely short rise and fall times. So how do you reduce it? You increase the keying waveform rise and fall times, that's smoothing out the wave shape. Oh, that's it. Okay. Then let me see if, now, how do I do this? I'll stop sharing this screen. I need to go share another screen. And we'll go through the questions in the book. You can follow along in the book in page 81 is where we'll start. I think it's this file. See if I've got it set up right. E2E01 is the question number. Now these question numbers come from the question pool that you can download for free off the internet. I guess I could put that link into this list of references I'm going to put together. I'll make a note of that. Link to question pool. Because everybody knows how question pools are set up in the VEC system and all that stuff. I think we go over some of that next week. But it's in the book. You can Google VEC for volunteer, whatever EC is, I forget.
Wayne, I want to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the chat, we have a question that
Okay. Question.
That I didn't know the answer to. And when you were talking about spread spectrum, W5MBF asked, is this the same as trunk radio systems? And Greg, K6ITL, is the expert on this, I think. Can you talk about that a little bit, Greg?
No, it's not an expert. I just know trunk systems that they use encryption, and it's a channelized protocol. So it's kind of like they have what they call talk groups. You know, if you got DMR, but there's specific channels that you tune for the frequencies, and that's all because just from a scanner perspective, that's just the light knowledge of that
information.
So I'm not sure if it uses spread spectrum within each channel or not, but like I said, it's a channelized system, and normally especially your police, fire, and stuff, they'll use encryption on those channels, so that people just don't sniff on and stuff like that for privatized two-way communication.
So the answer to Mike's question is no.
Yes, that would be the answer. A trunk system is a method of local, usually public service, police, fire, sheriff, etc., sharing radio communications and radio frequency channels, FM, still FM, but can be encrypted and sent, transmitted digitally, encrypted, like you're saying. But it's not spread spectrum. Spread spectrum would take too much bandwidth to put in a 12.5 kilohertz FM channel. It just wouldn't fit. So yes, the answer to the question, is trunk radio run spread spectrum? No, it's not. They would have to get, there's some, like around in Fort Worth, the Fort Worth police, I believe, have like a secure tactical transmissions up in the hundreds of megahertz. They may have 900 megahertz where they can use spread spectrum for really secret. I mean, you can lock up the privacy of a spread spectrum signal to where nobody's going to get into it, encrypt it, or make false transmissions that any receiver will receive. But trunk radio systems are not that.
Okay.
Okay, so any other questions before we go off into the test list of test questions?
I think you can go ahead.
I
All
did
right.
have one, please.
Oh, question?
Well, actually, it's more of a statement. I don't want to steal any of your thunder, John, but you did mention that Qualcomm invented the spread spectrum. Actually, the original concept was brought about by the actress Hedy Lamarr back in World War II. She was quite a smart lady and everything. Qualcomm pretty much perfected it and brought it into modern usage here, but the original concept was by Hedy Lamarr.
Yes, she was an actress, right?
That is correct, sir.
Yes, I believe I've heard that. I said Qualcomm because they have all the patents on it. I don't know if the patents are still active, but they're the ones that invented all that.
That is correct, sir.
Okay, good, great, thank you. That's good information. Okay, we're looking at a question here that says, which of the following types of modulation is common for data emissions below 30 megahertz on the HF band? What modulation type would you use? Frequency shift keying. It's what you're going to use below 30 megahertz.
Well, you might also use phase shift keying, but in that question, that's the only one that's right.
Well, that's the correct answer for that question is frequency shift keying.
That's correct.
Yes. What's the difference between FSK and audio FSK? What did I say? What's the difference between direct FSK and audio FSK? You remember direct FSK put the digital data right on the transmitter VFO, and audio frequency transmitted the data by changing the tones of an audio signal, changing the frequency of the audio signal so it can go by phone transmission. Phone can mean AM or FM or sideband or whatever how you want to transmit phone, but it's an audio signal when it's AFSK for audio. What's the common cause of overmodulation of AFSK? You have to watch the signal level going to the transmitter. Excessive transmit audio levels causes overmodulation. Just like any other phone transmission. What parameter evaluates distortion of an AFSK signal? What parameter was that? Intermod distortion. These others don't make sense. Don't worry about it. Distortion is intermod. Intermod's a killer for digital transmission. What's considered an acceptable maximum intermod for an idling PSK? Need to be below -30. You know, in measuring, do you remember this? It might have been general or tech. I don't remember which level. Some of the recent graduates of those license tests may know. dB, the bigger the dB number, if it's negative, is a smaller signal. So you want it to be less than -30 or more than -30, ever how you say that, I don't know. Why should phase shift keying be done at 0 crossing of the RF signal? That's redundant. Why should phase shift keying of a PSK signal? Well, that's how you make a PSK signal is by phase shift keying. Why should it be done at the zero crossing? It minimizes bandwidth. That didn't highlight either one, did it? PSK done at the zero crossing. Minimizes bandwidth. And one basic rule of every amateur radio transmission is use the least bandwidth and the least power possible. Which of the following is a possible reason that attempts to initiate contact with the digital station on a clear frequency are not successful? All the choices, which include your transmit frequency is incorrect, which also means the receiver bandwidth is not hearing your transmitter. Your transmitter is outside of the receiver's bandwidth at the other end. Not just the transmit frequency is incorrect, it's outside the receiver bandwidth. But all the choices are right. The protocol version is not supported, or the other station is unable to hear, is using what? Another station you are unable to hear is using the frequency. I've had that happen trying to work FT8, is that a strong station is working a bunch of people and I can't get to him, and I finally end up figuring, okay, there's other people talking to him that I can't hear. And that happens for any channel in ham radio, especially HF. What's the most common data rate used for HF packet? What was that one? 300 baud is HF packet. What's the relationship between symbol rate and baud? They're the same. Symbol rate and baud are the same. What's the definition of symbol rate in a digital transmission? What does symbol rate mean? The rate at which the waveform changes. It's a bit rate. How fast you're transmitting bits in your code, in your digital code. Which of these digital modes has the fastest throughput under clear communication conditions? 300 baud packet has the fastest data throughput in this list. I mean, there's other faster codes, but not in this list. You remember that graph we had? I'll put a link to that graph in there. Amtor was slower. 45 baud RIDI is definitely below 300, and PSK 31 is 31 baud. Amtor was what, 74? I think is the right number for that one. Which of the following HF digital codes can be used for binary files, to transfer binary files? That's the PACTOR. HF digital mode PACTOR is binary files. What are some differences between Baudot code and ASCII? Now this is a whole bunch of gobbledygook, but all you have to know is Baudot uses 5 data bits. ASCII uses 7 or 8. And don't worry about all this other gobbledygook. It's just put in there to confuse you. Baudot uses 5. I mean, go. If you're ever at a ham fest and you can find a ham radio handbook that ARRL put out from 20 or 30 years ago, they go over all of RIDI. And I'm getting ready to do a RIDI presentation for the North Richland Hills Amateur Radio Club that we are part of and putting on these license classes. And we'll talk about these 5 data bits. But that's all you got to know for this question. The differences between Baudot and ASCII.
Yeah, one of the ways to remember that is a little bit of the history. The Baudot code was the code that was used when telegraph went to teletype. And the engineers that designed that used 5 bits because that would allow them 32 characters. And then they realized they needed upper and lower case, so they had that's what all that other gobbledygook is about. But it's a 5-bit code. ASCII was designed for information interfaces for computers, and computers have a lot of 8-bit stuff in them. And the ASCII code with 8 bits has 256 character options, which means you can have uppercase, lowercase, numbers, punctuation, and all within that 256. 5 to the 2 to the 5th power is what? 32?
That's 32.
That's right.
Just
So
barely covers the 26 alphabet.
exactly. And that's the way to remember this question. The Baudot code was the old teletype, which had 5 bits. The ASCII code uses 7 or 8 bits, and the ASCII code also has some has a checksum. It's either odd or even check code, so that if you got a character in there and the checksum of the first 4 or the first 7 bits is not right, then that 8th bit will tell you didn't get the information correctly.
That's right. Yes, that's called a parity bit.
Yeah. So that's more information than you actually have to have, but maybe it's an easy way to remember the technology.
Right. Yeah, radio teletype goes back a long way. It originated on closed circuit wire connections before it hit radio. Okay, too much information. What do the letters FEC mean as they relate to digital operation? Remember, A is the forward error correction. Don't look at those other answers, they'll just confuse you. I like to avoid confusion whenever I can.
Indeed.
How is forward error correction implemented? By transmitting extra data bits, extra data that can be used to detect and correct the transmission errors. Because for the receiver to detect and correct errors, it has to have some extra data. So that's how it does it. You transmit extra data with your message that you're sending. How does ARQ accomplish error correction? That's the automatic retransmission request. The receiver senses an error, it requests a retransmission in a packet system. ARQ is retransmission request in a packet system. Which digital code allows only 1 bit to change? Remember the name of that code?
Gray.
That's the gray code. That's right. Called gray because 1 bit at a time changes. Those are weird to work with, but that's how it works. There's advantages to that, but that's beyond the scope of our discussion. Orthogonal frequency division multiplexing is used for what type of amateur communication? High speed. It'll run some high speed. What does orthogonal frequency division multiplexing described as. No, that's not right. Orthogonal frequency division multiplexing is a modulation technique with subcarriers at frequencies chosen to avoid intersymbol interference, because intersymbol interference will tear up digital communications. I mean, it just straight tears it up. What is indicated when one of the ellipses in an FSK crossed ellipse display disappears? What we say about the disappearance of the ellipse? You've got selective fading going on. Now, it's not always going to be choice A. You can cover up A, B, C, and D and just find selective fading and you've got the right answer. That's why I'm linking keywords in the question with the keyword in the answer. One, because it's correct information, and two, that's how you'll pass the test. And I expect everybody to pass the test the first time. I haven't had, now there was one or two problems with people not passing the test, but I believe in this method because I was able to teach people with no technical background the technician test, the technician license class material, and they all passed the first test period, the first test attempt. And that made me happy. That was when I got 2 daughters and a wife to get their license. Yeah, they don't like it now, but that's tough. We taught them. That was our guinea pig class for North Richland Hills Ham Radio Club. There are pictures all on our webpage. If you want to see them, you can guess which picture that is. What's an advantage of using ASCII code for data communications? It can transmit upper and lowercase text. Okay, I'm not going to expound on that. Upper and lowercase can be coded in ASCII. 256 upper and lowercase could go in ASCII. What's the advantage of including parity bits in ASCII? That's that extra. It can be the 8th bit if you're using a 7-bit ASCII code, and you can look all that up on Google. What's the advantage of using a parity bit? You can detect some types of errors when you use parity bits.
And it's not an error correction thing, other than if you detect an error, you can send a request back via handshaking. Right. That's how internet program software can be communicated back and forth, because you can use a checksum to know whether or not you got it.
And in digital coding for communications, there's a big difference between detecting errors and correcting errors. The parity bit is for detection of an error. I don't know what page we're on. Here, page 86 is where we are if you're following along in the book. Sorry if I've lost you. What's the bandwidth of 170 hertz shift 300 baud ASCII transmission? The bandwidth was 0.5 kilohertz, 500 hertz. And let's see, next question. What's the bandwidth of the 4800 hertz frequency shift 9600 baud? That sounds like a wide bandwidth to me, so that's 15.6 kilohertz. That's the biggest number in that list.
There's a way of getting that approximation. If you add the 4800 and the 9600, what do you get?
Close to 15.
Close to 15. That's an approximation, and it does not, in that approximation, it does not account for a little bit of bandwidth due to the switching. That
Right.
also works for the previous question. 300 baud at 170 hertz, 300 and 170, and you add a little bit more to it, so you get 500 or
Yes.
half a kilohertz. It
Yes.
works in both. It works in both cases.
3, right. Yeah, that'd be add up to 470. I think the approximation in the book multiplies the frequency shift by 1.2 before it adds it to the baud.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's from the book.
But
And
that's where that comes from. Those two frequencies add
right,
up.
right. But you don't need a calculator to figure that. Just remember 4,800 hertz shift, 9,600 baud ASCIIs of wide bandwidth. Which of the following HF digital modes uses a variable length coding to make its bandwidth less? PSK31. Everybody thought we'd found the next best low, real small bandwidth digital mode when PSK31 hit. And yeah, it was, but you can get narrower if you use CW. But for a digital code, PSK31, then you don't have to copy CW. But copying CW is fun, so you should try it sometime. How can you increase the data rate without increasing bandwidth? How could you do that? You use a more efficient digital code, which translates to pack more data bits by your coding scheme, digital code modulation. But that's not on the test. Sorry, it's too much information. I mean, all this is a summary of about 3 college level classes that I sat through. What technique minimizes the bandwidth of PSK31? How would you minimize that? Use sinusoidal data pulses. Now think about it for a second. Sinusoidal, if you draw out a sinusoid data pulse, just one bump of a sine wave, and you connect a bunch of those together, some going up, some going down, positive and negative, if you want to think about it that way. The signal's not changing a whole lot. Sometimes it changes a little bit when you want to change from 2 zeros to a 1 or 2 ones to a 0, something like that. But you're almost making a sine wave. It's almost phase shift keying, but and that technique really minimizes the bandwidth of a PSK31. It's really cool how the mathematics for that works out. Which of the digital, but you don't need to know all that. Just know that sinusoid data pulses minimizes the bandwidth of a PSK31 at 31 baud. Which of these digital modes has the narrowest bandwidth? Which one do you think has the narrowest? 300 baud packet, that's pretty wide. PSK31, probably. So it's the narrowest of all that's up there. 45 baud RIDI is 170 hertz shift. That's almost audio band full, 3 kilohertz wide, 500 hertz, somewhere in that range. How can an APRS station be used to help support the public service communication activity? Use it with a GPS. Global positioning system to transmit. See, this is worded really weird, so you don't really understand what the answer is. The APRS with the GPS can automatically transmit a mobile station location. That's all that gobbledygook means. These questions are good with gobbledygook. So you got to get familiar with it so you can get past it. What digital protocol does APRS use? That's the AX.25. What type of packet frame is used to transmit APRS beacon data? Packet frames are called unnumbered information. These others are commands in data transmission. Unnumbered information is a packet frame. That's the type for APRS beacons. Which of the following data is used by APRS network for location? What would you transmit for location if you have a GPS on board? Your latitude and longitude. You get that straight out of the GPS. On what frequencies are spread spectrum transmissions permitted? Above 222 megahertz. That's half of the 220 band, and everything on 450 and up, you can do spread spectrum. How does spread spectrum frequency hopping work? Frequency hopping and spread spectrum is transmitting the signal very rapidly in a pseudo-random sequence, the same pseudo-random sequence as the receiver uses. Transmit the signal very rapidly.
I played with a spread spectrum idea with a friend. We had a pair of CB radios, and we transmit each word moving up a channel. And that's what spread spectrum frequency hopping does. It moves channel by channel by channel by channel by channel. And the circuits that build that frequency hopping thing have a sequence that is unique to that particular pair of transmitter receivers. So it is changed rapidly. My pseudo-random thing with that CB transceiver was next channel up, next channel up, next channel up, you know. And we could actually talk to one another doing that.
Huh, that's cool.
More information anybody wants to know, but that's what spread spectrum is. It's just that, you know, we did it manually with switch.
That's
anyway,
how frequency hopping works.
Yeah, totally illegal.
Oh yeah.
I didn't say anything about that.
I didn't hear anything about that. I know nothing. What spread spectrum communication technique uses high-speed binary bit stream to shift the phase? That's the direct sequence spread spectrum.
That is the direct sequence system.
Yes. And all that's done in integrated circuits and DSPs. Why are received spread spectrum signals resistant to interference? Because other signals not using that algorithm are suppressed in the receiver. That algorithm that they're referring to means that particular pseudo-random sequence, or it can be the method of calculating the pseudo-random sequence and calculating the received signal. It can be the method of calculation, or it can be a different pseudo-random sequence.
Yeah.
And the receivers won't hear each other. It's cool how that works too. But that's too much information. What following conditions apply when transmitting spread spectrum? What do we say about the conditions for transmitting? They're all right, because every amateur transmission should use these conditions. Not cause harmful interference, be in an area and frequency regulated by the FCC or wherever the country is you are. Transmissions not to obscure the meaning of the communication. And, oh, I thought that was the last one. Which of the following frequencies are sometimes used for amateur radio mesh networks? Frequencies shared with various unlicensed wireless data services, such as your Wi-Fi. We actually set one of these up one field day and had real legal amateur radio Wi-Fi between all the different stations. It had its problems. What type of equipment is commonly used to implement the amateur radio mesh network? That would be a wireless router running custom firmware. And yes, we did have custom firmware. So it was legal, but it just didn't work very well. We were too spread out. So what happens around your house if your nodes get spread out? You take your laptop across the street to show your neighbor your new laptop, and it won't connect to your Wi-Fi. You're too far. That's not on the test. You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, the
Just
advantage of a ham radio system is you're not limited to the few milliwatts that a router has. You can take that router output and amplify it to 2 watts or 3 watts and put it up on a tower and transmit it out to the whole Fort Worth metropolitan area if you live in Chicago like that.
You could, or at least to the excursions of the 1,000 feet limitation at field day. But no, we didn't get that far with it.
No, I understand.
So what technique do individual nodes use to form a mesh network? What's the technique called? Discovery and link establishment protocols. Which of these digital modes does not support keyboard to keyboard operation? That's the PACTOR. This is not support. See, they're going to get you if you look for keyboard operation. You think, oh, Riggy can do that. Sure, Riggy does that. So does PSK31 and MFSK, but not PACTOR. Somebody question? Charles?
Yeah, I just wanted clarification on the mesh networks. I can't remember the name of it, but I've seen it advertised where some of the ham folks are using. They're using Ubiquity gear with custom firmware, but it's using the same 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz frequencies that Wi-Fi are using. So are you saying that there are some people using them on some sort of ham bands that's near those frequencies? Because you can't go into those wireless routers and bump them up to 3 watts. They're not going to do that I know of.
Well,
No.
you have to put an amplifier on the output of it. And putting the amplifier on the output of it is legal for a ham transmission. And the frequencies are the same. We share that band.
I'm sorry, there was somebody else talking at the same time. Are you saying that they're using the same frequencies as a Wi-Fi router uses?
Yes,
But as a ham, we're allowed to use the higher power. Is that what you're saying?
that's correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
You
All right.
You can run a kilowatt and burn out everybody's Wi-Fi router.
As long as you stay in the ham frequency.
Cook your lunch and fry your fingernails, you know. But so there's some practical limitations, you know, for communications around the whole area here. around the metropolitan area where all the hams can link into the same computer network and network one another, that's perfectly legal.
Now, do you
Yep.
have to be a certain class, like an extra to do that?
No. Technicians have all privileges above 50 megahertz. All privileges above 50 megahertz. If you're a novice, you could not do it. And there are a few novices. I think there are something like 10,000 novices in the country.
Ooh,
Just
wow.
renewed their licenses year after year after year. Some of them are my friends. Very often those will be spouses who got licensed as a novice and just kept renewing their licenses, but aren't going on. Does that answer your question, Charles?
Yeah, I believe so. And yeah, I work with point-to-point Wi-Fi, and we typically use, we're just using what's commercially available. But boy, I'll tell you what, it works great when you got a good antenna.
You betcha. And with a ham radio, you're not limited on antennas. You can do whatever you want to do.
Right.
Put a dish between you and your office. Well, you can't do business stuff, but
No.
You and your ham friend on the other side of Fort Worth, for example, from here to Fort Worth is kind of in the valley, and it's easy to get a 25-mile link on a 15-foot mast on both ends. Okay, more than we wanted to deal with, but thanks for that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Let's see. All right. Approximate bandwidth for a 13 WPM word per minute Morse code transmission. What was that? Like 52, like the weeks in the year. 13 words a minute code, CW, 52 hertz bandwidth. What factors affect the bandwidth of the transmitted CW signal? And I think we've got 2 or 3 more questions, so we're nearly done. What factors will affect the bandwidth? Remember the factors? Keying speed and shape factor. Rise and fall times. Slow down the rise and fall time, you reduce the bandwidth. What's the primary effect of extremely short rise and fall times? You're going to start getting key clicks. Key clicks really increase the bandwidth, and it can increase the bandwidth outside the audio range, because on stations I've heard with key clicks, you can tune off 10 kilohertz and still hear their key clicks. Their transmitters are putting out just wads of RF. How do you reduce key clicks? Increase the rise and fall times of how you're switching the transmitter on and off. That's all.
Well, this next segment is going to be on satellites and space communications and that kind of stuff. And I discovered this website in fooling around. Let's see, did I share sound? I bet I didn't. Let me go out and do it again. Can you hear the radio signal?
Yes, I hear it.
Well, the bandwidth that I'm using here is policies of my
It's not working in the moment. I have to fix. Yes, that's all stuff.
Ja, komplette und es gibt so eine Wideband an, das siehst du in dem Bild und da hast du das ganze Kurzwellenspektrum einheitlich.
Was hat denn das Ding für eine Schnittstelle? Das sind ja absurde Datenmengen.
Okay, what we're listening to here is a single sideband signal coming through the Qatar Oscar 100 geostationary satellite, and it's live. My computer is, with all of the Zoom stuff that I'm doing, my computer is protesting a little bit, so you get that jerk, 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 jerk kind of stuff as it tries to keep up with it. A couple of things I want to do here. First of all, I want to let you know that if you use this URL, which you see up here at the top of the thing, you can get this website, which is a software-defined web, software-defined SDR, software-defined receiver that covers the entire narrow band for the QO 100 satellite. And you can see in the way the thing is, there's a CW beacon down here, and there's an area for digital communications, and then there's single sideband. This is 250 kilohertz wide. It's as big as the 40-meter band. And the wideband repeater, which can do television and FM and all kinds of stuff, is above this. It's 500 megahertz wide.
Whoa.
Or some ungodly amount. And the uplink is on 2.4 gig and the downlink is on 10.4 gig. And you can see by the frequency over here on the left that I'm tuned to a station on 10,489.70414 megahertz. This satellite receiver is in the United Kingdom, and the footprint of the satellite goes from central Brazil on the east to Indonesia on the west. No, I got it backwards. Indonesia on the east and central Brazil on the west. It goes from the Arctic Circle on the north to Antarctica on the south. It's located over the Democratic Republic of Congo. I estimate it to be about 60 or 70 miles east of the equator town of Bandaka, which is the capital of the Equator province in Congo. Qatar government funded this ham satellite for their hams. It's managed by the German AMSAT Corporation. And we are not in the footprint. So because it's geostationary, there's no way that we can communicate through it. But it's very instructive on what's possible and what's there. Now, I'm going to zoom in on this signal that I was looking at. This signal is in German. And let's see if we can unmute and get a little better audio.
mache, damit ich da auch ein bisschen größere Bandbreite sehen kann. Anders geht es dann ja, da geht es einfach nicht mehr um Megahertz.
Now, one of the beauties of software-defined receivers is that they allow you to measure some things that you wouldn't be able to measure with your normal I guess I'm zoomed in as much as I can. Can somebody calculate for us how wide this single sideband signal is?
Where?
It's in this display right here. It starts at 704.14 and goes up to whatever that frequency is, 707.
The kilohertz.
It's just under 707. It's just under 3 kilohertz wide, right?
Right.
Have you heard that number before?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you were to go to lower sideband, if this were an AM signal, you'd have a carrier right here, and you would have the same waveform you've got on the right here on the left. And single sideband is generated by doing a mixer that gives you double sideband but removes the carrier. So you would have this piece here and this piece here. What happened to this part of the signal generated on this side? It's gone. So what happened?
Filtered out.
Yeah, it's filtered out. There's two ways of doing that. One is by a phasing system so that you put a plus and minus signal in there and just null it out. The other way is what we're using mostly these days in our ham rigs, and that's a very sharp filter that that filters it in. And in our studies, we're going to get some questions that relate to this kind of stuff. I want to go down and show a CW signal. If I can get it to work.
Spam the mouse.
Yeah, I can do this. Okay. I think this is not a CW signal, but there's the calling frequency for slow scan television. And I don't know what that signal is. Let's move it into the center and zoom up at it. This may be a digital mobile signal of some kind. I don't really know. Okay, this is the lower beacon on the satellite. Let's see if we can hear that.
Sounds like FSK to me.
It is FSK, but it's CW. And I'll show you how we tune that out. I'm going to go to a narrower bandwidth. Move up to it. Hi, this is QO 100. I find this kind of stuff fascinating. I don't want to take a lot of our time on it, but I thought it would be illustrative of what's going on. And this is CW, that's frequency shift keyed, so that there's always a carrier, but it would be technically F2 communication Morse frequency shift keying. Only hams can put up with that tone for very long. Does anybody have any comments or questions about that? That's what we're going to be talking about here in this section. Somehow there's my Word document. And let's go to share screen. And let's discontinue the share sound piece. Okay. Very early in the space age, back in the late 50s, as the US began to launch satellites, the amateur radio community had a number of engineers who were involved in the space program who negotiated sending up ham satellites as ballast on rockets. They needed a little bit of extra weight, and the hams of that time and that era who had the opportunity and suggested using ham satellites. So Oscar 1 was launched not long after I was licensed. I was in high school, and it operated on the 15-meter band with a FCC special temporary authorization, and it sent the signal in CW, did it, slower than I spoke it, did it, which to the world said hi. To those CW operators, high meant laughter, and it was a way of saying this is a whale of a lot of fun, and we hams are in space at no significant cost to us. As the Oscar program developed, and as the AMSAT Corporation began to launch more satellites, they designated them Oscar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so forth. And Oscar 7, when it was launched, was a really exciting launch, because those of us with 10-meter receivers could listen to the satellite transmissions. And so I broke my teeth on satellites not by transmitting, because I didn't have any 2-meter equipment at that time, but by listening to the 10-meter signals coming through the translator. And you learn about Doppler shift, and you learn about inversion, because they were sending upper sideband. I guess they were sending lower sideband on 2 meters and coming up with upper sideband on 10, so that it would go with the receivers. I don't remember. The exciting thing is that Oscar 7, though it was launched way back in the 70s or 80s, is still an active satellite today. And that 2-meter to 10-meter translator was just absolutely remarkable. Now, the problem with that 2-meter to 10-meter translator was a regulatory problem. And I guess let me ask the question this way so that you can think about it. If you're licensed to operate on 2 meters and your signal is going to be translated to 10 meters, can you legally operate through that 2-meter uplink? What do you think?
I think you can.
Well, the first ruling of the FCC was no, you can't. I'm not sure where the thing stands now. But one of the questions we're going to get in this sequence of questions is who can operate through satellites? And the question is not who can operate, it's who, can you operate legally? Do you have the authorization? And I think the FCC waived the 10-meter limitation for technicians coming through the translator, but I'm not sure where that stands now. But that was a really exciting thing in those days. That satellite was off the air for a long, long time. The batteries in it, the nickel cadmium batteries in it, have a limited lifetime, and they think that with the solar panels on the bird charging when they were in sunlight, eventually they burned out the bad part of the solar cell that was not functioning. Right now, if you're going to operate from Oscar 7, you have to do it in a daylight pass, and it alternates between the 2-meter uplink and the 10-meter downlink. And I think it's a 2-meter uplink. I haven't looked at it in a long, long time. I think it's a 2-meter uplink to a 437 uplink. The translators just simply receive whatever signals are there and then retransmit them in the passband. So they're on Oscar 7, it's 100 kilohertz passband, and the beacon is off the end of that translator frequency on the upper or lower end, depending on which end of the thing you're dealing with. And is for this bird, it's an inverting translator, which means the heterodyning that they get to transfer the frequencies and mix the frequencies is positioned so that the lower frequencies on the uplink or the upper frequencies on the downlink. Now, we just heard the QO100 geosynchronous satellite positioned over Africa, and you saw the SDR website. And I talked about the footprint of that. There's a 250 kilohertz so-called narrowband translator, which is for CW and single sideband. FM is not allowed in that translator. Some of the satellites that are up, like the Oscar '90 and '91 satellites have simple FM repeaters in them. And you can access those satellites with a cheap Bofang handheld if you program them properly and have an antenna that gives you, well, 2 or 3 element antenna gives you enough gain to get into them. And tracking software from some of the apps that are available for Android telephones will let you know exactly the azimuth and direction for where the satellite is when it comes over. Most satellites, and I think probably all satellites, have some telemetry beacons that report the status of the bird to the ground stations. One of the requests that AMSAT made when Oscar 7 was launched was they asked hams to send signal reports and telemetry data and give the time and place and where you were and copy the data so they could track the battery current and the transmitter output and the transmitter mode and all of those things. It was keyed into CW, and those of us who were using CW were able to get it. So these days, not all the telemetry beacons are CW. There's a lot of 9600 baud ASCII coded beacons. But you can still hear the beacons when you tune to the frequencies. So the first question in this sequence is, which amateur stations are eligible to operate as Earth stations, operating through the amateur satellites? And the answer to that is any station subject to the privileges of the class of the operator held by the control operator. If Wayne can highlight these, I can too. You don't have to have an amateur extra class license to do it. A technician class can. Novice license could if the satellite parameters were in the novice bands. But I'm not aware of any that are actually in novice bands at this point. The only general advanced and amateur extra class operators leaves out text for sure, and there is no such thing as a filed pre-space notification with FCC's International Bureau. That is just the humor of one of the question writers. Okay, the next question is, what is a space telecommand station? And as you would imagine, a space telecommand station is a station that commands the satellite. And it's where the control operator of the space station can initiate, modify, or terminate the functions of that space station. And an amateur station that is located on the Earth for communication with other Earth stations by means of satellites, that's just a regular old ham station like all of us have. And a telecommand station is not located in a satellite or balloon that's 50 kilometers above Earth. That 50 kilometers is the level where outer space begins, but it's not. The telecommand station is an Earth station commanding the satellite. And it's more than a station that receives telemetry. Although the telecommand station probably is going to receive telemetry, that's not its function. So the answer is B.
John?
Yes.
Question.
Sure.
Are you adding the satellite audio intentionally?
Is it still going?
Yes.
No, I'm not. Sorry. In fact, I thought I had shut the audio off, muted the audio.
I'm not hearing anything.
I ain't hear anything either.
Oh, I'm hearing something. Wonder if that's me making it.
I will just disconnect my browser completely, because it could conceivably come through the audio on my computer, even though it's not being shared by Zoom.
Yes, computers like to do that kind of thing.
Yeah. Is it
And
gone?
we also,
Is it gone?
no, it's still there. We also have a raised hand. Michael? You have a question? Maybe my audio's gone berserk.
No, your audio is fine. If
Well,
you,
if I'm the only one hearing it, don't worry about it. I can get over some noise.
I think that was when John was asking for our hands when we came back.
yeah, and Michael probably didn't lower his hand.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, John Dale, were you stretching or you ready for a question?
Sorry, I'm stretching.
I love it. I love it. The beauty
Getting ready for my afternoon walk.
Well, if we were in the same room, you'd know the answer to that question, but we're not, and that's one of the limitations of a Zoom. And you know, the technology is wonderful, but if you raise your hand at one point and then don't take it down, it stays. Okay, and this question has to do with who is eligible to be telecommand station for space stations. And again, it is subject to the privilege of class of operator license held by the control operator. But who can operate a telecommand station? And that person is not designated by NASA. It's not any station designated by the International Telecommunications Unit. So if those two are wrong, D is obviously wrong because all the choices are not correct. And that leaves any amateur station so designated by the space station licensee. Simple. It's the same legal principle, the same regulatory principle as who is authorized to use K5 LTD as the call sign of the station they're operating. And unless I give that authorization to somebody else, I'm the only one on the planet who's authorized to do that. But if I were to tell John Dale in Lincoln, Nebraska, or any one of you that you had my permission to use my call sign, there is absolutely no reason, that you could not legally do that because you would be so designated by the owner of the licensee of the station. That's most usually applied for remote control of a station, but it's not necessarily limited to that. Okay, what is the definition of telemetry? Telemetry is, by its definition, sending of data from one place to another. So the two-way transmission answers are ruled out immediately. And a one-way transmission that initiates, modifies, or terminates the function of a device at a distance is not a telemetry signal. That is a radio control signal, which we're licensed to do in some bands. But the answer to this question is therefore A, which is one-way transmission of measurements at a distance from the measuring instrument. That measuring instrument could be sensors on a satellite, sensors that measure the voltage, sensors that measure whether the solar panel is charging, sensors that measure the temperature of the circuit board, all of those kinds of things. Telemetry could also be used by a station that we controlled that sent us the temperature of our neighbor's back porch, provided it met regulations otherwise. So a telemetry signal is a one-way transmission of measurements, so you can measure it at a distance from the measuring instrument. Very complicated wording on that. Wayne, you ran into a little bit of that yourself, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Okay, what must be posted at the station location of a station being operated by telecommand on or within 50 kilometers of the Earth's surface? This is a station operated remotely, and it's either on the Earth's surface or it's below the 50 kilometers, which defines outer space. So this is basically an Earth station. This would cover the requirements of a station being operated remotely over the internet to one of the super stations that you can rent time on. You could operate it from, well, a few years ago, the sweepstakes was won by a station in the US that was operating remotely from Africa. And the requirements are all of these: photocopy of the station license, a label with the name, address, and telephone number of the station licensee. The licensee could be in the room with the equipment, or he could be on vacation in Tahiti or any place else he wanted to go. And the label with the name and address and telephone number of the control operator. So those 3 bits of paperwork need to be there. And I suppose it's so the FCC, if they found the station was creating malicious interference, they could know who to call to shut it down once they broke into the place. Yeah, we've got some background noise, don't we? Which of the following may transmit special codes intended to obscure the meaning of messages? In general, code intended to obscure the meaning of messages, encrypting, for example, is not legal for FCC license ham, but this is one of very few exceptions. It may be the only exception.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is telecommand signals from a space telecommand station. And it can be encrypted for obvious reasons, because that space station could be easily commandeered if some things were not encrypted. So that's one of the few exceptions to that rule. And if you want to look it up, it's 97.211B. I'm sure there's a 211A and a 211C, so those will be the other exceptions. Okay, Keplerian elements. Kepler, physicist, the orbital mechanics of a satellite define where that satellite is going to be at any given moment from the mathematics. And the Keplerian elements are the parameters that define the orbit of a satellite. Its speed, its altitude above Earth, its orientation, its plane of orientation with regard to the plane of the Earth and the solar orbit and all of that kind of stuff. And given those parameters, there are formulas that you can plug in to allow you to calculate where that satellite will be at any moment. Because of the vagaries of outer space and the fact that we can't know all of the things that are affecting the orbit, like gravity of Mars and the gravity of Venus and the gravity of the moon. The Keplerian elements are changed, and they're sent out from ARRL on behalf of AMSAT in its bulletins on Keplerian elements. What is the direction of an ascending pass for an amateur satellite? To know the answer to this, you've got to know that ascending is a north or a south to north pass, and a descending pass is from north to south. So that if you know that definition, and it's just one of those definitions you have to know, the direction of an ascending pass by definition is from south to north. And it doesn't matter if the pass is going to be at an angle. It's not a true polar orbit. It's just the south to north component of the movement of the satellite. Okay, simple. What type of satellite appears to stay in one position in the sky? And HEO is high Earth orbit. LEO is low Earth orbit. High Earth orbit could or could not be in one spot. Geomagnetic has nothing to do with the orbit of a satellite. It has to do with the magnetic field of the Earth. The answer is B, which is geostationary, which means stationary with regard to the Earth. It's 22,400 or 500 miles above the Earth over the equator, and at that altitude, it takes 24 hours for the orbit to be completed. So from the Earth, it stays in one single spot. Not all geostationary satellites are exactly over the equator, and if not, they will go north and south a little bit, but at the altitude that they are, they will still be geostationary. More information than you wanted to know, but it's no extra charge. Okay, what is meant by the term mode as applied to an amateur radio satellite? Is anybody into, who do we have here that's into satellites? Anybody?
I'm starting to
Jose KD4JWF.
Okay, go ahead. KB4JW.
No, sorry, I thought it was somebody else also answering. But yeah, I do some. I started with a space station, and now I'm doing different ones. I even built my own controller with assisting another operator with the U100 rotors. I created the horizontal, vertical rotors for that. Built my own antennas, and then created their own control box using Orbitron.
Awesome, awesome. Now, let me ask you, what is the mode? Mode A, mode B, mode J? What do those designations mean?
Oh, let me see, what was the question again? What is the mean mode that's like transmitter?
You don't have
the frequency the band is going to be operating, the satellite they're going to be operating on.
Right. A mode A satellite is Oscar 7, 2 meters up and 10 meters down. Mode B is the other operation on Oscar 7, which I think is 2 meters up and 437 down. And mode J and the other modes will deal with the other bands. I don't know what the mode of the QO100 satellite is, but the mode, when you talk about the mode of a satellite, it's arbitrary designation A, B, J, whatever, and that will give you, if you know it, the band for the uplink and the band for the downlink. So the answer is B. It's the satellite's uplink and downlink frequency bands. And it has nothing to do with how high the orbit is, whether it's low orbit or geostationary. It has nothing to do with the satellite's orientation with respect to the Earth, and it has nothing to do with a polar orbit or an equatorial orbit or anything in between. It's just a designation of the frequency bands.
One more quick comment for satellite. Anybody that have not performed or done any satellite, the exciting part is when you have the rotor system and you can build it yourself. They have a lot of new stuff coming out on YouTube. But it's just an exciting moment to watch the antennas go up and down, left to right, tracing a satellite.
Yeah. And I don't think you want to be under them when they're doing that. Unless they're
I learned the hard way when I was adjusting the antennas, and I forgot to take the satellite on tracking. And when it came to the horizon, the antennas activated, and next thing I know, I got a bump in my head.
You have my sympathy and also some envy. I do not have a good satellite antenna. Okay. Is that the same question we just had before? No, this one is different. What do the letter in a satellite's mode designator specify? How is this not the same question? It's the same question, but it's reversed. This is asking what do the letters in a satellite's mode designator specify? And the answer to that is D, the uplink and downlink frequency ranges. It's again the bands that the thing operates in. Does not have anything to do with polarization. It has nothing to do with any ground control station, and it has nothing to do with the power limits. So again, mode designator is frequency ranges, like A is 2 meters to 10 and B is 2 meters to 70 centimeters. Okay, what do the terms L-band and S-band specify regarding satellite communications? And this is, again, one of those things you just have to learn. The L-band and S-band were designations for microwave frequencies when microwave frequencies were first being used for things like radar and aircraft altimeters and those kinds of things. And the answer is A here, given Wayne's advisory comments. Be aware that when you see that question, the answer may be something else. But the 23 centimeter band is the 1296 band. 13 centimeters is a 2.4 gig band. You can calculate those yourself. Okay, which of the following types of signals can be relayed through a linear transponder? Anything that goes in that's in the passband will be translated back down to the ground. So FM and CW certainly meet that. Single sideband and SSTV certainly meet that. PSK and packet meet that. So the answer is D. All of those choices are correct. Why should effective radiated power to a satellite that uses a linear transponder be limited? Obtuse way of phrasing that. You've got a satellite with a linear transmission. Why should you limit your effective radiated power? wouldn't it be to your advantage to shoot a kilowatt of effective radiated power at that thing and be in control of it?
Yep.
If your goal is to have everybody that uses a satellite totally upset with you, that would be a thing you might try. The guideline is through a linear translator, you should have your signal return should be no louder than the or no stronger than the beacon signal on the bird. And so operating through a transponder, you're probably well advised to be able to do full duplex, so you can look at your signal and compare it in strength to the satellite beacon, especially when you're beginning to get it adjusted. Once you've got it set up, it'll probably not change. But the reason that you do that has nothing to do with the satellite's telemetry, though. If you overload the battery in a satellite that's marginal like Oscar 7, you could do serious damage to the telemetry and to the battery and all kinds of things. But that's not the answer. And the answer is not to avoid interfering with earthbound QSOs. People who talk to satellites usually want to talk to satellites, and good amateur practice would be not to use the satellite frequencies to begin with. C is there says to prevent the satellite from emitting out of band signals. And I suppose theoretically you might overdrive that translator to the point where it did some spurious things, but I really doubt it, because the translators typically will have an automatic gain control in them. And if you put up a strong signal, the translator will protect itself by reducing the output power to the translator, the transmitter coming down. So the answer that is left is B, to avoid the downlink power to all the other users. Okay, I've got 20 more questions. I need to move it right along. Which of the following occurs when a satellite is using an inverted linear transponder? And an inverting transponder means that the high frequency in the uplink comes out as the low frequency on the downlink, and vice versa. So Doppler shift between the uplink and downlinks is reduced because the shifts are in opposite directions. You still have Doppler because you're on two different bands. The signal position in the band is reversed. If you're operating 10 kilohertz below the top end of the uplink, you'll be 10 kilohertz above the low end of the downlink. And C, the upper sideband on the uplink becomes lower sideband on the downlink. That's inverting, and vice versa. So all of these answers are correct. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about mixing signals, because this is a principle that, if you've been around many years, you know this, and I probably, for some of you, I'm telling you stuff you know, but I want to illustrate a couple of things. When you combine two signals in a mixer, what happens to the output? And the answer to that is, if you combine two signals in a mixer, the output contains four frequencies. It contains the first frequency, it contains the second frequency, It contains a sum of the two frequencies, and it contains the difference of the two frequencies. For example, if you have a 1 megahertz signal and a 1 kilohertz signal, you'll have a megahertz, a kilohertz, you'll have 1.00, well, you'll have 1001 kilohertz, and you'll have 999 kilohertz. Now, if you think about that, this is an audio signal modulating an RF frequency signal, and you get the output, which is the carrier frequency, and you get the lower sideband, and you get the upper sideband. Follow me? And it works out that if instead of F2 being just 1 kilohertz, it's a bandwidth of audio, like we heard on the satellite, that whole band will mix and it will give you the sidebands on both sides. Okay. It's not hard to rig a circuit that will eliminate the carrier. At 1,000 hertz. And it's not hard to rig a filter that will eliminate the audio. So what you have left then would be a double sideband signal with the frequencies of one sideband above the frequency and another equal, similar group of frequencies, the sideband below, upper and lower sideband. Now, if you wanted to filter that and you had a receiver that could do it, you could generate a single sideband signal by filtering out everything below the carrier frequency. All kinds of possibilities. That's beyond what we need to do here. But suppose you had a 14.01 CW signal, and you mix it with a 23 megahertz signal, you would get 23 megahertz, the 14 point, I didn't put another 0 in there. You would get the 1401 CW signal. You would get a CW signal at 37 megahertz, and you'd get one just below 9 megahertz. And if you filtered that out with a filter that was really sharp at 9 megahertz, you could, at that one frequency, create an intermediate frequency that you could build a really sharply tuned amplifier and amplify the signal at that intermediate frequency. That's how the super heterodyne receiver works. And if you combine a 5 megahertz and a 14.001 signal, you get 5, 14, 19, and 9.01. And so you get in this equation, in the second example here, the sideband is below the carrier frequency. And in this example, it's above the carrier frequency. And that's how you get the inverting thing. You do a local oscillator that is above the frequency that you're converting, and you get the inversion of the sideband from the math. Does that make sense? Or have I confused everybody? Yeah, Kevin, your audio didn't it's doing a loop of some kind. Sorry.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's, this is very simple, basic stuff, but a lot of the answers and questions, including next time when we're talking about the legal limits of where you can put a single sideband transmitter. There's some questions we'll deal with in regulations. This understanding of how the frequencies get combined, whether the process is modulation or whether it's in a mixer that is designed to convert frequencies to different bands. That principle is one that is at the heart of a lot of the stuff we talk about. Need to move on. How is the signal inverted by an inverting linear transponder? The answer to that is the signal is passed through a mixer and the difference rather than the sum is transmitted. Remember? The difference rather than the sum. So you get the inversion. Has nothing to do with I and Q components, which that applies to software-defined equipment. It's not a nonlinear filter. It's a mixer, and the signal is not detected and then remodulated on the reverse sideband, because that's a really expensive process. What type of antenna can be used to minimize the effects of spin modulation and Faraday rotation, the stuff that Wayne was talking about in his section? But this applies particularly to satellites, and the satellite spin, the spin modulation has to do with the turning of the satellite in orbit. And Faraday rotation has to do with rotation in the path. The answer to this is you use a circularly polarized antenna. The challenge with that is you have to know, well, it'll minimize the effects for a satellite. If you're doing station-to-station, point-to-point communications, you have to know whether the polarization is left-handed or right-handed. And if you get it wrong, you lose about 17 dBs of signal. Which of the following techniques is normally used by low Earth orbiting digital satellites to relay messages around the world? What happens in satellites, because if you're on the far side of the Earth, you obviously can't communicate with the person that you're going. So you store the message in memory on the satellite, and the command from the station on the other side gets it. So it's a store and forward message. It's not digipeating. It's not, we're not sophisticated enough with satellites to do multi-satellite relaying very much. There have been a few experiments, but not regularly. What's the purpose of the digital store and forward functions of an amateur radio satellite? And it's the reverse of the question we just had. To store digital messages in the satellite and later download to other stations.
When you get to the end, can I ask a question?
What's your question?
This is a dumb question, and I was told, but I think, but I don't remember. Is the test actually can it be virtual?
Yeah, I'll delay the answer to that. Well, we have capability in our club to do virtual tests, and we can make that available to anybody in this class if you want to do it.
So in other words, I can take it on my computer somehow and you'll know that I'm not doing something I'm not supposed to do.
Yeah, you will think your privacy has been totally invaded when we get through with you. Well, it's not really true. We're really
Say
nice.
again?
Well, part of the setup for that is you need to be in a room where you don't have anything on the desk.
I'm not worried about the how just now. I just wanted to know. I don't want to take your time anymore, but I just wondered because I'm not real crazy about going anywhere these days much. You know what I'm saying?
Understand. We will accommodate you, and we'll give more details of that when we get toward the end of the class.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that is a possibility, right?
It's a very great possibility. I don't want to go in the same room with anybody either.
Thank you.
So that's part of it. We're on the same page. Okay, which amateur bands have frequencies authorized for space stations? Now this is HF amateur bands, space station authorization in the regulations. You can look it up in 97.207. And the answer is A, which is really kind of surprising, but it's 40-20, the WARC band of 17 and 12, and then 15 and 10 meters. And there are allocations there. There are some satellite stuff that operates on 10 meters. I think there have been some proposals for 15, but I don't know of other bands. Okay, what VHF amateur bands have frequencies authorized for space stations? The trick in this question is we're talking VHF bands, and there are only 3 VHF bands in the US. There are 4 ham bands if you count the 4-meter band that Europe has. But the answer is 2 meters. There's not an allocation for the 220 band, and there's not an allocation for the 6-meter band. Just 2 meters. And remember, VHF is 30 to 300 megahertz, which leaves out the 70 centimeter band. And then which UHF bands have frequencies authorized? UHF is between 300 and 3,000 megahertz. And the answer is B, and you just have to learn these by rote. So highlight the question and come back to it and think about it again. And this is the 440 band and the 1296 band, 1240 to 1300 megahertz, 13 centimeter bands. Okay, we've got 8 more questions. What is the approximate maximum separation measured along the surface of the Earth between 2 stations operating by EME? EME is Earth, Moon, Earth. Moon bounce, you're bouncing a signal off the moon. The diameter of the Earth is 8,000 miles. The circumference of the Earth is 24,000 miles. And that means that if you have two stations on opposite sides of the Earth, 12,000 miles apart, they can communicate via moon bounce if the moon is visible to both stations. Because you can't bounce something off you can't see. Apogee and perigee have to do with where the moon is with respect to the Earth, how close it is. And we've got the next question is going to deal with that, I think. What characterizes libration fading of an Earth, EME, moon bounce signal? The answer is B. It's fluttering and irregular fading due to multipath things because of the irregularities on the moon surface when the signal is reflected. It's not a Doppler effect, which would be the change in pitch. It's not a solar radiation problem. And it's not a returning echo. It's flutter fading because that's the libration. That's what it means. When scheduling EME contacts, which of these conditions will generally result in the least path loss? The answer is A here in this sequence. It's when the moon is at perigee. Perigee means that the moon is as close in its orbit to the Earth as it gets. Apogee means it's as far away as it gets. The moon's orbit is not circular, it is elliptical. And sometimes of the month it is much closer. I don't know, 10, 15, 20% closer at perigee than it is at apogee. So has nothing to do with the phase of the moon. It has nothing to do with what the maximum usable frequency is. It has to do totally with how close it is, and it's closest at perigee. Which of the following describes a method for establishing EME contacts? And the answer is A. And what they mean by that is that you're running a schedule where you transmit for a given amount of time, and then you're listening for a given amount of time. A signal from the Earth back to the moon and back, it takes a round trip of 4 seconds. And the software in the WSJTX package for that is JT65, which is designed to receive very weak signals below the noise. And that's the next question. JT65 is the mode. JT65 has a cycle of 1 minute at a time. And there's about a 4-second lag in between so that it will actually do really well for moon bounce. What is the advantage of the JT65? Answer is B. It's the ability to decode signals with very low signal to noise ratio. It will receive signals that are up to about 30 decibels below the noise in the receiver. And the signal report for JT65 of -30 would mean that the signal actually was 30 decibels below. Okay.
KD4JWF, real quick.
I'm sorry?
This is Jose, real quick. those that have never had the experience of moon bouncing and stuff, besides digital, do the voice, you have worked on satellite communications in the military, you understand this. The whole echo is kind of interesting to hear you back within that minute or less.
Yeah, you've got a 4-second echo basically. You make a short transmission and you hear it coming back at you. Right. You've done that in military?
Yeah, I was able to participate with the signal company. I was an MP, so everywhere we went, we had a signal company. So we had to do a lot of satellite communication. And once in a while, we moved the dish to the moon to see what we can do with it.
Oh, fun. Yeah, I've never heard a moon bounce QSO. I've only read the details. Okay, what type of modulation is used in JT65? And it's multi-tone audio frequency shift keying. And it's generated by the software. How is the timing of FT8 contacts organized? FT8 is very similar to, or FT4 is very similar to FT8, except it's faster. JT65 is 60-second intervals. FT8 is 15-second intervals. FT4 is 7-second intervals, or 7.5-second intervals. So it doesn't depend on any of the other things. It's just you transmit for 7.5 seconds and you listen for 7.5 seconds. We've got two more questions. What technology is used to track in real time balloons carrying amateur radio transmitters? And the answer to that is the mode that deals with locating stuff, and that's APRS, which uses GPS. And in a satellite, you put in an APRS chip and in a balloon, and you get to track its latitude and longitude. Which of the following is required in the identification of transmissions from a balloon-borne telemetry station? You launch the balloon, you've got FAA permission to do so. It goes out and it goes up, and you need to identify your transmitter. And the answer is all you have to give is your call sign. Even if you've got an APRS signal or do not, the only requirement in the regulations is identifying it with a call sign. And that is the end of the section.